Hello everyone, my name is Ashley Leonard and welcome back to another episode of the Love Doesn't Hurt podcast, where we provide domestic violence education, empower survivors, and promote healing from the inside out. After a brief break for my mental health after the Maid series and with the start of school, I am back this week and we are covering trauma and triggers. I feel like a lot of us experience triggers from trauma and don't really know how to explain them or cope with them well initially, so we are going to cover all of that today. If you missed my latest series, I covered the Netflix show Maid, so be sure to go check that out. I really enjoyed being able to dive into a show that depicts domestic violence. I feel like a lot of relationships portrayed on screen are abusive, but we as a society have kind of normalized that and aren't really stopping and thinking twice about what's really going on and don't really recognize domestic violence when we see it on screen. Just as a reminder, don't forget to subscribe and follow the podcast on whatever streaming platform you use, and give the pod a 5-star rating or a like if you'd like to support the mission of Love Doesn't Hurt. With that being said, let's jump into the episode. Trauma is defined by the American Psychological Association as an emotional response to a terrible event. A traumatic event is often difficult to define because we all experience trauma differently, and some people may not be affected by an event that another person experiences as trauma. A traumatic event could be a single recent event, like a car crash or assault, a single past event, like the death of a loved one or a natural disaster, or a long-term chronic pattern of trauma, like experiencing domestic violence, childhood neglect, or another form of abuse. An experience may be traumatic because it threatened your physical or emotional well-being, it was overwhelming, it resulted in intense feelings of fear and lack of control, it left you feeling helpless, or because it changed the way you understand yourself, the world, and others. It's common to experience shock and denial immediately after the event, and longer-term reactions may be unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical manifestations like headaches and nausea. With domestic violence specifically, trauma often occurs because DV psychologically changes the way someone believes in themselves. It can damage your ability to trust, hinder your decision-making abilities, decrease your sense of safety, and create intense amounts of fear. After experiencing domestic violence, survivors may be in a constant state of being overwhelmed, and therefore unable to use their coping mechanisms, making it a difficult and lengthy process to recover from DV. Survivors are also often hypervigilant about safety, constantly scanning for danger, sensing and reacting to threats. These are all completely normal trauma responses, but they often make it difficult to live a happy and fulfilled life, so we need to address them for the betterment of our mental health. I personally have been to therapy after experiencing domestic violence to help address the trauma responses that I developed, and it was super helpful. So I highly recommend seeing a counselor that's able to provide cognitive behavioral therapy. This form of therapy helps you to better understand your trauma responses, and helps you to learn to reframe your thoughts and learn new coping mechanisms that are helpful for moving on after experiencing DV. Even 4.5 years later, I still find myself having some trauma responses when I'm triggered, and in everyday life when it comes to safety. So we can improve the way we respond to triggers, but it may be very difficult to make the trauma responses stop completely. In general, a trigger is a stimulus that elicits a reaction, but in the context of trauma responses and mental health, A trigger is something that causes a strong negative emotional reaction in response to something that is disturbing you in some way. In those with trauma, triggers often bring up involuntary memories of past traumatic experiences, making someone feel like they're experiencing the trauma all over again. Survivors of domestic violence may even develop post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, where triggers like sights, sounds, smells, or thoughts may bring back strong memories that make it feel like they're living through it all over again. When someone develops PTSD from a traumatic event, their brain hasn't processed the trauma as a memory of the past, but rather attaches to details like sights and smells to the memory that is then relived. These senses become triggers that make someone with PTSD feel stressed and scared even when they know they're safe. So we know it can be difficult to cope with trauma and triggers that bring back trauma. But what are some basic strategies we can use to improve our coping ability? First, we can be aware of our mind and our body. This helps us to recognize our triggers and to better avoid triggers and cope with them when they do arise. Physical manifestations of stress, like rapid heartbeat, stomach issues like feeling a pit in your stomach or having an upset stomach, feeling dizzy, uncontrollable shaking, cold and sweaty palms, and more, may indicate that you are feeling triggered by a certain situation. This awareness should allow us to question the cause of those emotions and store that information so we know when to use the coping strategies that we find work best for us. One coping strategy we could use is keeping a journal. This can be used to track information like I just mentioned, and to be kept so we remember when we're feeling triggered, what caused it, and what the trigger felt like. Another coping strategy we could use is mindfulness. Mindfulness involves awareness and acceptance. Awareness is having the ability to focus on your inner experiences, and acceptance is the ability to accept rather than judge or avoid your thoughts. Mindfulness strategies could be meditation or focusing on your breathing by taking slow, deep breaths and focusing on the breath as it moves in and out of your body. You could also try a walking meditation by finding somewhere at least 10 feet in length and walking slowly. Focus on your feet, pressing into the ground as you walk, and the sensations that come as you balance when you're standing and when you're stepping from one foot to the other. You can also try physical sensations to cope with triggers, like squeezing your fists really tight for a few seconds and then letting them go, holding ice, holding your breath for a few seconds, shrugging your shoulders up as high as possible and letting them drop, or anything else that physically distracts you. Physical coping strategies definitely work best for me, but everyone will have a different coping strategy that works well for them. The last coping strategy I will talk about, even though there are many more out there, is reframing. This is something that I learned while in therapy, and it definitely gets easier with practice. Reframing takes a thought or emotion and shapes it in another way. For example, if I was to think, I am never going to get all of my assignments done, I should just drop out of school because I'm a failure. I could reframe this thought as, I will get all of my assignments done eventually, but I may need to ask for extensions or cancel plans with my friends one night to get homework done, but I am capable of being successful in school. I may just need to make some adjustments to be the most successful I can be. Reframing our thoughts allows us to have a more realistic or less catastrophic view on our lives and helps us to have more emotional stability when coping with trauma. So that is all I have on trauma, triggers, and some coping strategies we can use to help heal. I hope you guys are excited that content is back, and be sure to tune in next week for more domestic violence education content. As always, it is my goal with the Love Doesn't Hurt podcast to create another resource people can use to understand their experiences, get help, and know they're not alone. If you need immediate help, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or text START to 88788. You can also visit their website, thehotline.org, for more information. If you would like to know more on trauma, triggers, or coping strategies, be sure to let me know in the question box if you use Spotify. But if you enjoyed this episode or learned something new, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. If you would like to support the podcast, I would really appreciate you giving it a 5-star rating wherever you listen. Thank you for listening to the Love Doesn't Hurt podcast. I hope you all have a great day, and remember, spread love everywhere you go.